The Disruptive History of LucasArts Games. I'm Tonya Hall, and joining me is David Fox, immersive storytelling pioneer, co founder, director, and game developer at Electric Eggplant. Welcome, David.
Hi.
So, what does Electric Eggplant do? And tell us about your journey in the world of game development.
Well, Electric Eggplant is a small, really two-person company that my wife and I founded back in 1992, soon after I left Lucasfilm. And the intent was to be a publisher, developer of media, games, books, and podcasts, and things like that. And so we don't have a staff. If I do a project, I'll either work with other people or we'll bring on people for projects as needed.
Disruption is a word we use along with other words like digital, organizational, and cultural to explain many of the events that happen in our rapidly changing society. You were there at the start of Lucasfilm. Is it fair to say that you and your coworkers, I should say, at the time, were some of the earliest disruptors in immersive storytelling?
Um, I think we'd like to think so. That was kind of the intent. Um, we were. I was there in 1982 when we started Lucasfilm Games. Lucasfilm itself was around for at least 10 years before that, with films basically. And this was the first time that Lucasfilm was venturing into interactive media. And originally we were kind of an experimental group within the larger computer division, which eventually was the group that became Pixar and Steve Jobs bought. So we were a small group within Pixar, or sorry, within the computer division. And our edict at first was just really to think out of the box, be creative. We had our own internal pressure because we felt like we had to live up to the reputation of Star Wars. So back in 1982, this was right after the second film, Empire Strikes Back, came out. They were still in production for Return of the Jedi. Star Wars was still huge. And we felt a lot of pressure to essentially be the Star Wars of games. And to kind of break that pressure, the first two games we did were described as throwaway games. They were going to be more of an experiment. We try some new things. If they didn't work, then there wouldn't be the pressure to publish them. But as it turned out, they turned out to be really great games. So that was mine was Rescue on Fractalus, and the other game was Ball Blazer. They were being developed at the same time. Both were very breakthrough. Um, we were doing things on 8-bit microcomputers that had never been done before. People couldn't believe it. I think in the case of Ball Blazer, people were looking under the table for video disc players, thinking maybe that the fast frame rate that we were getting from that must be faked. Um, with Rescue, we were getting great frame rates on rescue on fractal landscapes. You're flying through these landscapes, and it wasn't something people had seen before. So there's a big technical breakthrough there. Later on, I think it was more. In fact, all the games I worked on after that one were really story-based games, and I felt that was a really good match for Lucasfilm as a company that really tells stories. But ours were much longer form. Graphic adventures tended to be 30 or 40 hours long at the time, and had plenty of time to develop the stories and make them really as immersive as you could with with blocky limited graphics.
You mentioned breakthroughs. What were some of the technical breakthroughs of the time that helped you transform the art of storytelling?
Well, part of it was technical, part of it I think was environment. It was probably very unusual for a startup, essentially a startup game company, to have deep pockets. We didn't have to really worry about having huge hits right out the door. In fact, we were told to stay small and to not lose any money, but to do really great stuff. And that was really the focus. So we had tools that other people didn't have at the time, even though we were developing on 6502 based computers, Commodore 64, Atari 800. we weren't developing directly on them. We could use, VAX 750s to running Unix to do the compiles and to do the editing. And then after that, we started using Sun microsystems workstations. I have one in my office, and so all the development was done on a larger computer. Then we, use a cross assembler, cross compilers, and download to the target machine. And that freed up a lot of time to to let the larger computers do a lot more of the work to get the code optimized and to do that part rather than trying to do it on the machine you're working on. There was some time because you had to download it to the target machine, but overall I thought that it saved a bunch of time. It also meant that all the code could be backed up automatically with the rest of the um, everything else we were doing, and I think that just helped. Later on, when PCs became powerful enough to do the development directly on the machine, then that was not a big advantage. But I think we still had the advantage, which again was non-technical, of not having to rush things out the door in order to avoid collapsing as a company. We knew we had, it was don't ship. I don't know if I could say that. You can beep that out if you'd like. We were we really wanted to get things right. So we had, even though we had schedules, they weren't, at least during the time I was there in the 80s, they weren't like, absolute um, unchangeable schedules. We could, if we needed to go longer to get something right, we could do that.
Where did the inspiration come from back then? I mean, was it all George Lucas, or did you draw from other pioneers at the time or earlier?
Well, when I first started there, I assumed that my first game would be a Star Wars game, of course, and that was the intent. And on day one, I realized or found out that we weren't allowed to do Star Wars games. At that time, the license for everything Star Wars had already been sold to other companies. I think it was Parker Brothers and Kenner for home, and Atari for arcade. And so we had to come up with our own stuff. Um, So for at least the time I was there during the 1980s, everything we did was original IP, unless it was authorized as the two games I worked on. One was based on the movie Labyrinth, which was a Lucasfilm production, and the other was based on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which was also Lucasfilm. But the other games we worked on were original IP. Um, George didn't have a lot of involvement. He did on my first game, Rescue, where he came in during the beta period for about 20 minutes, played the game, had some brilliant suggestions, which totally changed the way the game is and makes it memorable still today as people's first game that gave them a jump scare. And um, that was George's idea to increase the tension and totally changed the game at the time. But after that, he wasn't really involved. Um, I think that was a blessing for us because I know that later on in the 90s and the 2000s, when pretty much almost everything that LucasArts, which was what Lucasfilm Games became, was doing was Star Wars. And as the games became more and more realistic, I think George was more and more involved in terms of giving direction, making suggested changes, which may or may not have messed up the schedules. And I think we, in a sense, dodged a bullet by not having to have him leaning over our shoulders and looking at the screen while we were doing stuff.
What were some of the lessons you learned about storytelling in those early days that seemed disruptive then, but have actually stood the test of time?
Well, one of the things that we did for Maniac Mansion, which was a game I got to work on, was designed by Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick, and I was the Scum scripter. It was written in, that was the introduction to the Scum language. Or Scum stands for Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion. And Ron came up with the idea of doing cutscenes, and this is now ubiquitous. That's nothing unusual, but at the time that really wasn't being done, where you'd have a cutaway to parallel action or something happening elsewhere in the environment, which is really very movie-like. I mean, in movies that happens all the time, where you cut between different story paths or different things that happen or flashbacks or whatever. But I don't remember seeing that much in games. Um, we had a lot of dialogue. We were really focused on making it easier for the player to get through the game. And I believe at that time, our I say our chief competitor for graphic adventures was Sierra Online, and they had a reputation for putting up barriers that killed you at every opportunity. So you do something like pick up a piece of glass, a broken mirror, and you cut yourself and bleed out, and that'd be the end of the game. You have to start from a save game. And we felt that things that you could do in real life shouldn't be things that would kill you in a computer game. And so we at first we didn't eliminate deaths completely, but we'd pretty much telegraph that this was something that could be dangerous. So you knew that what you were getting into if you wanted to try, pushing the button for a nuclear weapon or something that would probably blow up and you probably die. But walking down the stairs probably wasn't going to kill you. Um, and that idea of really letting the story unwind with as few barriers as possible was something I think we did that was different than most of the games at the time. And in the game I most recently worked on with the same crew, Thimbleweed Park, I think we got that to a much more refined place where you really can't die at all. There are no dead ends. And not only can you not die, there are no dead ends in the game. So there's always a point where you can complete the game no matter what you've done. And because we really want you to finish, we want you to have the experience of getting through it and to enjoy and not be really frustrated. So we added a hint system. We added a lot of things that make it easier, like lists of checklists of things you have to do, reminders from the characters of things they have to do. It makes it feel integrated to the story. And we really want you to experience a story like you would a movie. I mean, if everyone walked out halfway through a movie, then that wouldn't be a very good experience. You never know what happened. And I mean, you have that choice, but it's pretty rare. I think people do that. So in a game, if you can't get through it and you get too frustrated, that's not very fun.
So true. Making games fun. David Fox, co-founder, game developer at Electric Eggplant, and immersive storytelling pioneer. Thanks so much for joining us and talking about your history and how here we are today because of people like yourself, David. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want to find out more about your work, how can they do that?
Well, you can find me through my website, Electric Eggplant, like the vegetable.com. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, David B. Fox, B as in boy, Facebook as well. But I think Twitter is probably where I'm most active. So you could probably catch me there.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, David.
Thank
And if
you.
you guys want to find more of my interviews, you can do that right here or go to tonyahall.net. Thanks for watching.